dealing with multifamily housing and specializing in affordable housing. So I usually bring a different perspective to these kinds of things. But today I'm just really here to introduce the panel, but also want to express our thanks as the HLC board and organization for you being here and attending this and other workshops. We really are focused on solving the problem of housing shortage, affordable housing shortage in San Mateo County. And we'd ask that if you're not a member of HLC, that you consider becoming a member. It's an opportunity to be more deeply involved in the effort, but at the same time, through the membership fees and so forth, we can, those of us who can give on behalf of those who can't, and are also members of our organization. And there should be a QR code somewhere on the table here that you can, right there, if you get information on the organization and the opportunity to join. The workshop is nothing so far about ADUs, which intrigued me when I saw it. And the moderator is Nicholas King, who's the executive director of an organization that I don't know a lot about, but I love the name, SOUP. And it really sort of talks, in my mind, I can see all kinds of different components coming together to solve a problem. And the workshop is sponsored by City Systems. So that's it for introduction. And I'm going to turn it over to Nick and his team to present their material. Thank you.
Hey, good morning, everyone. So both sides are fine because the four of us are going to be talking. So excuse our backs when we're talking, but everybody can see. And we'd like everybody to just feel free to ask questions along the way. There'll be some time at the end too. We have some presentations we're going to go through, but we'd prefer to keep it conversational and interesting for you. So we're going to dive in and just begin with a story. I'd like you to all imagine that I, as executive director of a nonprofit who, among other things, who tries to build housing and wealth using tools like ADUs, comes to you. Maybe you're a potential donor, or maybe you are in government, and I, just want you to be on our side. And I tell you that I'd like you to support a project of mine. It's going to be built in a factory, not on site. And there's going to be a lot of cost benefits to that because all the stuff you need in the house is going in by these gentlemen in a controlled environment in a repeatable way. So presumably there's some money saved. And it's in a giant factory that does this all the time, and they get better and better at it for each one that they do. And in the end, it's going to be beautiful. It's going to be solar powered, which is part of legal requirement too. And there's a lot of other good things that we have going for it. So there's the fact that we already have the land for it, right? There is a site in East Palo Alto. There's an existing home on it that's built somewhere between 50 and 70 years ago. It's in California, where we all know that we are in dire need of more housing. And we intend to hold both properties in trust in perpetuity to keep them low income, which has a lot of benefits to it because it's somewhat, it's not just affordable housing that we're trying to promote. We're also trying to keep the neighborhood of a certain character, or at least stop it from turning into a certain character. We'll keep the rent affordable. There's no neighborhood opposition from any of the neighbors, formally or informally. We've got some good partner nonprofits, some allies at the city, even state laws on our side. And it's low cost, and we probably think that we can get this whole thing done maybe somewhere between like $30,000 and $50,000 worth of site work, electricity, sewer upgrades, or whatever. And let's say somewhere between, less than 150 for the actual unit itself. Like all things considered, the question that I would pose to you with this great idea is what could go wrong? And will you, can I have a donation? Do I have your support, or do I have your vote? Whatever, however you want to imagine yourself as a listener. And so the answer to that question is the structure for kind of this conversation for all of the four of us here. And we'll come back to that later. So what we're going to do is, my screen. What we're going to do is you're going to hear from people who work for the city, people who work for innovative nonprofits, and we're going to give a few case studies about the work that we're doing and recent experiences, recent and current experiences, and our efforts to build housing and to build wealth without displacing people as much as possible as well. We want to know, we want to explore with you kind of what the realistic, with really an emphasis on reality and realism. What are the concrete steps that we need to take to overcome challenges? What do we mean when we say we? Who's the we? What obligation does tech companies have that are on the peninsula? And so I want to be clear from the outset that we're not trying to bring you down, that we hope to end on a positive note and talk about sharing what resources are useful and share data, and also where we think there are gaps in data where we can learn more. And that's, so today we're going to hear from Karin, Ileana, and Derek. And in case you don't get the slide there, the point is that we're over here on the right, jealously looking at the ADU state laws there, hoping that they apply to us as well, and not just for kind of hypothetical utopian dream jurisdictions. Before we dive into case studies, I want to give a little bit of context about this group and also East Palo Alto. So first, we're on a panel today, but this is what you're seeing is a working group that meets regularly. And the purpose of us doing that is just putting our heads together to better navigate and deliver projects. We try to remove obstacles, share ideas about how to remove them for each other. I feel like I benefit disproportionately from the three of these guys. I don't know if I've helped them as much as they've helped me, but it's really, it's like the flip side of what you might read in the newspaper about a Sacramento article, like what's going on like in the trenches behind the scenes when you get down to the real detailed level of work. What goes on when you're dealing with city departments, county departments, water districts, personalities within those departments. And that's what we're going to talk about. I'll just say personally, what I see when what's on the screen is just some numbers from the most recent census about East Palo Alto. The thing that excites me the most, and what these guys can answer for themselves, if they find some meaning in these numbers, is what I think is a relatively high percentage of home ownership in East Palo Alto. It's not nothing, and there's a lot of equity there. There's a lot of opportunity to be in control of your own land and your own fate there for a relatively low investment or outlay of money to build house that can build equity because your properties are appraised higher, and rental income, multifamily situations, all sorts of things. And I think importantly, the front yard stays looking like the front yard. If you drive around East Palo Alto, the things you see in the front yard are very different than what you would see in Menlo Park or Palo Alto. And ADUs is one way to keep it that way. And just by comparison, thanks. Those are the disparity between East Palo Alto versus Menlo Park. You can kind of see the difference in median home value, college education, twice as much poverty, more or less. half as much income. And that's the comparison to Palo Alto, which is fairly similar, although it looks like I'd rather own a home in Palo Alto. So that's some context and where we kind of find or at least personally, I find part of my kind of call to action. And I'll start now by turning it over to Ileana and right? Yeah. You were looking at him, I was nervous.
So hello everyone, my name is Ileana Nicholas and I'm with EPA Can Do. We're a nonprofit in East Palo Alto, focused on affordable housing and building generational wealth for our households. So EPA Can Do used to be part of, we are still part, as Nick mentioned, we're part of this technical working group, and this technical working group actually has roots in a larger process. A couple of years ago, there was a period where East Palo Alto residents were really advocating and asking the city to have local policies around second units. Communities like East Palo Alto usually are living at on margins. They're living within their means, and they also need income. And so before state laws loosen up ADU, local ordinances, a lot of people built these unpermitted second units. And so there was a response by residents to have the city really look into creating like amnesty programs, ways in which the city could go ahead and help homeowners who really wanted to build a unit, the right way, but unfortunately are met with reasons to do it unpermitted in an unpermitted way. So what EPA Can Do did is by sort of riding on the coattails of state legislation with ADUs in the recent years, we created a program called the Can Do Your ADU program. And what this program is designed to do is to reach out to every homeowner in the city of East Palo Alto and really talk about ADUs. And so we have this process laid out in which we start speaking to homeowners about what is actually physically possible on their lots. And we also guide them and do a series of casework initiatives with them, from securing financing to getting your professional team to take you around plans and permits, construction, and then ultimately leasing the unit that they built. And so our program is primarily focused on low-income homeowners in East Palo Alto who earn 80% or less in the AMI. And since we launched in 2021, we reached out to over 3,500 homeowners in East Palo Alto, and we worked with over 85 households to date on ADUs. But out of those 85 households, we really only have about a little bit over 10 households that we've actually impacted in a tangible way in terms of actually helping them to secure financing, helping them get their plans and permits, construction, and lease up. But when we started this program, we didn't have a financial product to offer them to really help them build ADUs. And so in the work that we came across this and taking people through these steps is that we came across two groups of homeowners. One set of homeowners who needed to work on their financial capacity to be able to achieve the ability to build an ADU. And so what we did is we took those households through financial readiness assessments to really work up their financial capacity. And these type of homeowners usually take about a year or so to reach that point in which they can go to a bank, their local bank, and apply for financing to build their unit. And then the second set of homeowners are homeowners who already have some type of level of access to financing, but they just need some help to get going. And so they come to us to help them navigate that process.
Could I ask a question?
Yes.
Oh,
Go ahead.
Last slide. Real quick. You mentioned that you helped 85 residents, but only 10 were impacted in a significant way.
Mhm.
What happened to those 75?
Yeah, I'll go into more detail about what happened to them. And so But if you're still curious on knowing a little bit more, at the end, we can answer a little bit more in-depth questions. Thank you for that. So as I mentioned, there were a couple of set of homeowners who had access to financing, but they just needed a way to get started or know where to look. The process I had showed previously is the typical process in which homeowners are expected to go through, right? And so usually people who can go through this process are people who have, all their funding for their project. So what we did here is we took a couple homeowners through the process of qualifying them for financing, getting them a team started and to get their ADUs going. And so this is a couple of examples of some of our ADU clients that we took through the process, right? But we always, no matter who we talk to, these numbers of project costs were always a barrier to some homeowners. When homeowners looked at how much it costs to build an ADU, they were pretty much automatically discouraged. It's a really high cost, and not everyone has that much money in their bank account to be able to take on a project. So just slightly going back to that concept of working with the second unit task force, when that task force concluded, we set out a couple of recommendations to the city of East Palo Alto to really go after some funding to help homeowners be able to achieve the possibility of building these units. So what we did is that back in 2019, the California Department of Housing and Community Development, HCD, they added ADUs and junior accessory dwelling units as eligible activities that people could use the funding for CalHome, which is an award that is usually given to cities to provide assistance for first-time homebuyers and for home rehab. So it was the first time they ever integrated ADUs into eligible activities. So what the city and EPA can do along with the task force, we jump on it. We went ahead, let's apply for this funding. So we went for it and we got it. We got $2 million from the state to be able to give out loans to East Palo Alto homeowners. So in this long list of people who qualify from some sort of funding from CalHome, we're very little here on this, very here small, I hope you can see it. We're right there, one of the awardees. And so we actually ended up being the only city and organization in all San Mateo County to be able to have these loans. And so far, as I mentioned, we've been the only ones to receive this funding. So we thought, great, we got this funding, right? So let's get started. Let's help some homeowners build ADUs and so on and so forth. But our journey to actually getting this program up and running actually took a long time. As I mentioned, we applied back in 2019. We were awarded in July of 2020. And we did expect for it to take a while for us to actually receive the funding. But we didn't really hear from them for a long time on when are we going to get this funding. And so then in March 2021, we got a message from HCD saying, hey, you have 30 days to produce these loan guidelines and sign a contract so that you can get the funding going for your homeowners. And so we rushed to get these funding, these program guidelines up and running. And at this point, the Can Do ADU program was up, and we were already doing the work, working with homeowners on ADUs. And it made sense for us to build the loan around the process that we had been working with. And now that we had the loan to offer, we felt that it made our program stronger, right? And so what we had found during discussions with a lot of the homeowners that were interested in building ADUs was that they were hesitant about a couple stages in our process. And while talking to them, we had a pretty good idea, of where we could use those $2 million to really make a difference. And so where we thought we could have those funds really make a difference are in the 3 stages are these three stages, which are financing, plans and permits, and construction. And so with financing, a homeowner usually needs funding to cover their project costs. So now, great, we have a loan. Then we have plans and permits. And so in some cases, homeowners could pay for their for design, for example, like paying an architect to just draft up some designs. But when you take in consideration like city application fees, impact fees, surveys, and so on, the cost to obtain permits was costing homeowners around $20,000 to $40,000 at most at times. And so then with construction, a lot of our infrastructure is aging and some of it needs upgrades as well. And some of the upgrades, for example, that it might be like upgrading an electrical panel, repairing sewer water lines, or even repairing a roof for like an attached ADU. So we said, okay, we're gonna go ahead and use those $20 million to help these three key areas for homeowners. So we estimated that we could help around 20 homeowners with gap loans ranging from $70,000 to $80,000 based on the type of ADU project they wanted to build. And if you're not familiar with what a gap loan is, it is a loan that a household gets when they already have some funds available, but they just need to meet a gap in their funding. And so because we had heard that homeowners were hesitant about these real and perceived barriers, we set up a construction loan with progress payments along the way to really help reduce those risks of starting an ADU project. So again, giving them money at the stages of plans and permits, at the time they do upgrades to their house or the property, and then giving them assistance with construction. And so we're going ahead and we had 30 days to do all these guidelines. So we drafted our guidelines, right? And so we met our deadline, and in June, HCC said, great, we accepted your draft guidelines, we accepted your contract, you're good to go. So we thought, so we thought, right? And we get back to getting our guidelines ready and setting procedures up for this loan program. But then in July, HCD reached out to us and said, just kidding, we actually need more documentation from you before we can actually give you access to these funds. So we got back to working to getting all their contracts in place, all the procedures in place that they wanted to see before they can give us funding. But if you ever worked with like loan setup or any type of program setup, you need to get contracts in place with everyone you're working with, from loan underwriters to title companies. So we drafted loans, we opened up bank accounts, but every time we did one of these things, it turned into needing more things. So we needed city manager signatures, we needed to get on city council agendas, which is hard enough, to get resolutions passed and authorizations. So it was a lot of things happened. But then in October of 2021, we finally got the okay from HCD, and they told us that we can now access the funds, but we have a lot of loose ends to tie up. And so in December, we start working on our marketing outreach plan for the loan, and we launch it in 2022. And at this time, it's been 2 years since we had applied for the funding and a year since we had launched the ADU program from the EPA Can Do side. And also not to mention that a whole entire global health crisis was occurring at the same time. And so after January, for the majority of winter and spring, I am working with a lot of homeowners. I'm doing assessments, I'm doing site visits, I am looking at their financial capacity. And I ended up working out with 8 really good qualified, pre-qualified homeowners for the loan itself. And what I mean by pre-qualified is that they actually met some of the loan requirements when it came to income, but they still needed quite a bit of funds outside of the Cal Home Loan and a permit to actually get the project going. And June comes around and we get our first homeowner in the pipeline. So this is somebody who submitted plans to get one of their units legalized, but the project gets stuck. The homeowner had hired a builder that had a lot of experience in legalization projects across the Bay Area. But the thing is that East Palo Alto doesn't have a formal legalization process or an amnesty period program. So we knew that, but we weren't expecting the project to get as stuck as it did. So while we're working on getting that project unstuck, Just this month, we did another wave of outreach to East Palo Alto homeowners to get them reinterested in the loan and seeing if we get more prospects for it. And so we're hoping that in the next 2 years, we get the full 20 loans issued because the funds do expire. And we have a lot of work to still do. So what is going on? Like, why aren't people jumping into this loan? And why are people falling out of the process, as somebody had mentioned? So we thought we had identified a need. We thought we had a solution figured out. And, you know, like as that saying goes, like when you wish for rain, you also have to deal with that mud that comes with it. So out of the 8 pre-qualified borrowers that I had worked with, 5 out of the 8 were code enforcement cases. These were people that were tagged for having unpermitted second units. And some of these were on the city's radar for almost like more than 5 years in some cases. But there's no legalization process at the city or amnesty program. So so projects do have the possibility of getting stuck just at the zoning clearance process. So they don't even make it to building when they already get blocked. But in most cases, most of the homeowners that I worked with did not have access to the initial funding that they needed to actually complete the entire project. And this is due to limited financial capacity. Sometimes their debt to income ratio, so they had high debt in relation to their income, was a barrier, credit scores, not documenting rental income. That's a lot of issues we ran to where people weren't documenting their rental income, therefore their debt to income ratio was higher. And so a lot of financial readiness, having to do that, a lot of financial counseling. And then it's something that's very common in communities like East Palo Alto. We shared debt, we shared liabilities with family members. And so again, that debt to income barrier in which, you know, you show that you are helping your parent, you're helping your sister, you know, purchase a car, purchase a house, for example, so then you're stuck not being able to do the projects that you want to do for your own self. Rising costs and inflation has affected all phases of project development. You know, we were looking at the possibility of prefab or modular ADUs to help you know, alleviate the cost for some homeowners, but we see that even on that side, they're facing high costs that unfortunately they do have to pass on to the consumer. And lastly, it is a household decision. Households have to make this decision and they weigh the pros and the cons. You know, who's gonna be the person managing the project, or who's going to be helping mom apply for an application? Who out of all the siblings is going to live in the ADU? It's a big household decision. And so sometimes it's hard for us to really get in the way of how people manage their own households, you know? So all we do is give information to our homeowners to really hope that we can help them realize these ADU projects and ultimately build generational wealth, help create affordable housing in our community, you know, stop displacement, and so on and so forth. And so while we're doing this stuff of the work on the ground, working with community members and so on and so forth, you know, the cities on their side are also dealing with their own set of things as well. So I'll pass it on to Karen now. And Karen will go ahead and say a little bit more.
Thank you so much, Ileana. Hi, everyone. Good to see you all. My name is Karen Camacho, and I'm the Interim Housing and Economic Development Manager at the city. I first joined the city as a fellow 2 years ago, working for Partnership for the Bay's Future, primarily focusing on housing preservation work. And in that relationship, I was able to understand the power of public-private partnerships, and also the fact that these kinds of partnerships can help really streamline processes. So when I joined the city on the staff side, it was very surprising to find a lot of the intricacies of government that make it challenging to make, you know, streamlining processes effective. So my current role is under the Community and Economic Development Department as a whole. We also have the Building and Planning Department, we have Engineering, we have the Rent Stabilization Program. And right now, I'm the only staff member in housing. So that can be, have its challenges in and of itself. But one of the things I realized when I first joined was that there was limited communication between the different departments in the city. So while building and planning really look at the review of the ADUs, housing focuses on the policies and really wanting to ensure that these units can be built. And so when we get a story like the story that Nick shared, it's really challenging to hear, Nick will share a little bit more what happened with that. But it's really challenging when you're, one of the allies within the city. You feel that your coworkers and the other departments are also trying to be allies, but at the same time, they have their own requirements that they're trying to meet, such as, building, always worrying and of course, wanting to ensure that all new developments have health and safety, meet health and safety standards. And so those departments within the city are, some of the steps along the way, but there's also the East Palo Alto Sanitary District that is in charge of our sewage lines. We also have the school district and the fire district that are also providing their input at different stages.
This might be a good time to tell the rest of.
Yes.
I'm laughing because of two things you said. I like it. Well, first of all, as a longtime former government employee, I am not a government basher at all, and I love what you do. But I like it and I respect your boundaries that you have to have in a recorded conversation in front of everyone. But I like it when you said the intricacies of government. That sounds so benign. And that when you also said that there sometimes can be limited communication between, those are somewhat of an understatement. So before you keep going, before we hear more from Derek, I want to tell everybody the rest of the ADU story. I go all the way back up. Will it work? It did. So that's not a rendering, that's an actual photograph. So this, well, I mean, it was built in a factory, this ADU. It is on site now. The story is over, except for the part where somebody's actually moved in. But the point I want to make is that I guess the overarching point is just that when we think about state law and even local laws, that the law is what the lowest level law enforcement officer says it is, period, right? Like, I mean, I learned that when I was pulled over once for driving, and I don't think I was doing anything wrong. And after a long conversation with the police officer, finally, after proving that I was not a threat, I asked him what I did wrong. He said I was speeding, and I said, well, what was the speed limit? And he said, he literally said it was 40, 60, 50. It was a transitional zone. And so he gave me 3 numbers. And that's how I think about that all the time when building, because it's really hard to know what the rules are. And so the unforced error on this unit is that in theory, factory built housing is inspected in the factory, which makes sense, right? Like while the walls are open, and you get a magic insignia that says inspected, cleared, and that's your pass, and it overrides everything on paper. So the locals are not supposed to be able to say, change this about the plumbing or change that. And for whatever reason, this one had a sticker, but it somehow didn't get stuck, or maybe it's stuck underneath and nobody can see it. But that was one unforced error, but I think it permitted somehow the local inspector to go inside. And the really, really, truly gigantic hold up on this one for more months than I care to admit, where this thing is about less than 300 square feet. This is suitable for one person, probably, maybe two. You can spread your arms out almost and touch both walls. But the local inspector said that this room that's closest to us in the picture, the living space, because at the other end is a bathroom and there's not much in between, needed a second means of egress. And said, all you have to do is just widen the window. And I couldn't widen the window if I wanted to. I don't know what these panels are made of. I don't have the special screw, this is proprietary equipment. You would void the warranty, you would mess up the waterproofing. There's so many reasons why you can't just make a window bigger. This is not a Home Depot stick-built situation where you can go down and just change it out with a saw and some tape. And the super frustrating thing was just the moving. I feel like you were nice too when you said that you were filling out documents for a long time, but it was the moving goalpost of just you need to get the replacement insignia, which was took a long time. Questions like, is it HUD certified, which I now know is irrelevant because the California standards are way higher than HUD. So it's just a silly question whether or not it's HUD certified. HUD does do that for some pre-built homes. There's a big difference between factory-built homes and mobile homes and trailer homes and office. There's all of these different flavors of pre-built, and they're regulated different ways, and it's really important. And if every single inspector doesn't know that, not only know it, but buy into it and believe it and understand the reason for it. And that's why I'm pausing a little bit on your presentation. These silos, like they mean a lot, because if you're over here at Housing and Economic Development and you guys are great and trying to do the right thing for the whole city, and then me and these guys are over here dealing with the actual inspector, and then, you know, a little footnote there, the sanitary district, who it's important to have a sewer. They haven't gotten the memo that by state law, ADUs that are less than 750 square feet do not have to pay fees at all. Just no. But we paid fees on this because you can't have that fight in the moment, right? Like, you're not supposed to argue with the cop on the side of the road. Like, you're supposed to argue later in a courtroom. That's a more appropriate place. But that's what we've wound up doing a lot, is just rolling with whatever the person says in order to finish the project or survive, and then fight later. So that's how that story ended, but it took way too long. Do you want to add anything else, or?
No, I appreciate the context. Yeah.
Can we jump in too?
Yeah.
I was just gonna say that it's easy to get frustrated at local jurisdictions, right? Especially when you're looking at state law and you're like, the state law clearly says, and you like read it back to them and you're like, what is the problem?
I wouldn't
And-
dare.
I've done that. And it wasn't until I actually started like speaking to the people in the planning department, and they're like, well, yes, I know that the state law says that, but let me tell you 3 different ways that one sentence could be interpreted. And then let me tell you what HCD said when I called them and asked how to interpret it. And it's not until you get in the weeds of that that you realize, like, it's actually, there's a lot of ambiguity, and then people are having to figure it out on the side of the road and decide what to do.
Yeah, we'll come back to HCD. You want to dive in and tell us some more about this lovely map?
Yeah, definitely. So I think so that is one of the barriers that we wanted to identify, and we can talk more about it later down the line. The other barrier that I identified when I started was the city's even tracking and reporting processes. When we were working on the annual progress report for the city, you know, we needed to figure out the amount of ADUs that were built for the year of 2021. And I realized that our tracking system wasn't as clear as I would expect it to be, you know, going in and being able to extract the data that we need in a, you know, very simple manner. And This was partly due to labeling. The different departments labeled ADUs differently. There was JDU, ADU, garage convert, new. There were very different ways to identify these units. And so we had to, sift through tons of data to figure out which ones were actually ADUs that were permitted through the planning or building process. And so this is where the ADU working group really came in and able to support us and specifically Derek in helping us get this data cleaned up and just able to find out how many units were actually entitled in the year 2021. That was a big question that we weren't even able to answer simply. So the map that you see here is a map that Derek created that demonstrates the different ADUs by organization in the city. So you can see EPA Can Do, SOUP, there's Hello Housing, and other ADUs. So this helps demonstrate just all throughout the city, where these ADUs have been entitled. And so we were able to finally get, an estimate of how many ADUs were applied for, approved, issued, or finalized throughout the years. And you can see this big jump in the year 2021. And I think this is partly, or maybe mostly, due to state laws, really shifting the extent to which cities can, create these bottlenecks. But there is still, these bottlenecks are still very much present. And as ADU laws, state laws keep changing, I think the city will really need to figure out what are, the ways that we're able to achieve ADU streamlining. So we worked on just simply meeting with the different departments and figuring out a more systemic way of labeling ADUs, which seems to be, something that you would think would be very simple, but just demonstrates the extent to which these different departments don't really communicate with each other. There's also, the need for better dashboard tools that can help us understand and visualize these items. So as you can see, the number of ADUs that have actually been finalized, gone through, the application process, the approval process with planning, getting the permit issued with building and final, the number keeps shrinking, right?
Yeah, I can jump in. Just like the way I think about a graph like this is, what does it mean to be red, orange, yellow, and trying to get to green? Reddish would be applied but not yet approved. So that would be, I think, like a lot of Ileana's cases she mentioned, where you can start the process, you don't even get to zoning clearance, maybe because a lot of those are legalization issues. Approved but not issued means you got past planning, now you're stuck with building and those other jurisdictions that need to agree. So that can get to the sewer issues and kind of, third-party reviewers for building not agreeing with basic design features, etc. If you're in yellow, issued but not final means you're ready to build, but maybe you don't have the money to actually build at that point, and you can run into all those inspection issues on site. So I think this, just seeing, in theory, you'd want those red, orange, and yellow just to not get bigger over time, at least stabilize, and hopefully you can slowly shrink those down so that everything's getting converted to green at a timely basis. But this lets you see more clearly the distinct problems that are in that space.
So as you can see, there has been a modest growth in ADUs over the years. And as part of our housing element this year, I know a lot of cities aren't putting ADUs in their housing elements. We did add them for our moderate income units because we think that these past year trends demonstrate that we're heading in the right direction. These are our RHNA 6 numbers. So East Palo Alto is unique in that we have been, I think, as a city, more focused on very extremely low income, very low income and low income housing units. And so we don't see the big, numbers for those income levels compared to other cities. But we do see a big, number of units that we need to build for moderate income and above moderate income households, which isn't necessarily what the city had been focusing on. I think if you look at the history of East Palo Alto and its racial and ethnic composition, and also the displacement and gentrification pressures happening in the community really just wants to see more affordable housing. But you also see that, state laws require firmly furthering fair housing. And so we need to make sure that there's also housing at all income levels. So what are some of the city strategies to meet the ADU goals? Like I mentioned, we are trying to use ADUs as our tool for building missing middle housing units. And what is really great, I think, is that the city already has its inclusionary housing ordinance that helps incentivize developers to build these ADUs. This inclusionary housing ordinance applies to all new developments, including single-family home developments. So if there's a single-family home being built, they can pay an in lieu fee, or they can build an ADU unit that is deed restricted. And in addition, there's different options that developers can use to meet that inclusionary housing requirement. And our in lieu fees are high enough to incentivize the actual construction of these units. And we have seen several cases where developers are willing to work with us to see if they can, build an additional unit. And we also have SB 9 that has been really helpful in also creating that incentive for the development of more units on our single family home lots. So there's an example of a recent SB 9 approval that went through the city just this June or July, where the developer was proposing a duplex and two ADUs, one attached ADU that was a little bit above the 500 square feet for JDU, so it could qualify as an ADU, and a JDU, an accessory dwelling unit in the back. And so this really, if you can see the lot on the screen, the parcel next to it had already gone through a subdivision. So it had been, I think, 10,000 square foot lot, which is somewhat common in the city of East Palo Alto. We tend to have larger lot sizes than other cities, which is also, really helpful incentive and I guess to meet the requirements for minimum lot sizes. So that is an example where the ADU unit was actually deed restricted at 35% of the area median income. So we are working on this year and going into the next year, having a fee structure reform and specifically looking into fee waivers for ADUs to incentivize the construction. I know that a lot of our, like Ileana alluded to, a lot of our residents are lower income and specifically homeowners in East Palo Alto tend to be lower income, multi-generational households where it really makes sense for their families to expand into these second units or for them to rent those units to get additional income. And so these fee waivers can really help support them through the process. And the second idea that we're currently discussing with building and planning, we're finally having those conversations that were very much needed, is how to get pre-approved GLADR plans that we're co-created with Heart of San Mateo County that you help provide these plans to homeowners interested in building in their on their lots. And I think one of the greatest questions and concerns that building has brought up is the fact that the city is primarily in a lot of flood zones. And so these different types of soils will need different foundations. And so I think that is part of the discussion of how to make sure that the plans actually help residents in East Palo Alto. And with that, I'm gonna pass it to Derek.
Thanks so much, Karen. So one last chapter here to the story. Hopefully we're gonna start to see some silver linings soon. So I'm Derek. My main job is I do research at Stanford, but then I've been involved in work wearing a very small nonprofit hat called City Systems. And as you can tell so far in the story, I've shown up being mostly data side and helping to kind of think about monitoring and policy evidence-based work. I was very happy to stay on that perch, but then one of the things that links us together, these nonprofits, is that we've received funding from Facebook's Housing Innovation Fund starting a year ago to really think about innovative ideas. So when I was basically invited directly to propose, I said, okay, well, instead of just doing data work, let me get my hands a little dirty and propose something that would actually lower the cost of the ADU itself. I had my kind of previous experience doing modular work as a student at Stanford, doing a solar house. So I kind of dusted some ideas off the shelf and said, can we do something prefab as a plug-in concept for garage ADUs? So we got some funding to basically do demonstration projects with the end goal being something that's well documented. There's actually 3 YouTube videos up if you want to see the progress so far. Just posted chapter 3 yesterday. And hopefully show that cost target being hit. But then after that, it's just open source as a concept, and that we've kind of introduced something that can really be lowering the floor of costs for these theoretically easiest and cheapest projects. So here's basically what it looks like. So some of my side job this last year or so has been finding a warehouse space. This is in East Palo Alto, and just working with a local contractor to just play with ideas in a kind of free zone like a warehouse. So the units in theory could be mass manufactured in a place like this, and it really is kitchen on one face of it, but the kind of backside of this box is the bathroom. So you can just imagine this getting plugged into the back right or back left of a 2-car garage. Going a little bit over to the corner here and peeking inside of roughly what that bathroom layout is, coming in from one side. Just basically one plumbing wall, and the idea. The idea in terms of the process is that you'd have a very, very streamlined plumbing that could also be basically pre-built, and you can then drop it under the garage slab or in a raised floor crawl space. And then you're bringing in pieces that from the warehouse could be basically picked up by 2 guys and brought in to the garage site. So you kind of enclose the bathroom space, do a kind of upper cabinet, lower cabinet setup for the kitchen. And then in theory, this could just be roughly one design. I mean, variation can happen, but it would just work for most folks. It can easily be disassembled as a kit of parts. So here I'm showing it, it could fit in like a 15-foot U-Haul. And then the idea would be once the garage is ready, which it definitely does need some work at the onset. For example, you might want to raise the floor and do lateral connection, planning, etc. But once that's roughly good to go, then in roughly a day or 2, you can have brought in the necessary pieces, and then you're almost done. You've reduced the amount of time that those really complicated mechanical, electrical, plumbing systems would have taken, and then you can hopefully get to completion very soon. So where are we in the process? I basically have built 2 of those prototypes in the warehouse setting, and then have been identifying local homeowners who want to be kind of demonstration projects on this. So this one is a family in North Fair Oaks. So now we're switching briefly out of East Palo Alto as the main story setting to unincorporated county here. And it kind of was a fairly straightforward process, although I'll talk about some challenges in just getting the garage itself ready to go, concrete curb, and starting to bring the pieces in. This was just about last week or so, starting to bring the dual walls in. And then I literally took this photo an hour and a half ago because had to go talk to the contractors this morning. So that's moving, and basically the duo process is going along well. You can watch the videos to see exactly what that looks like on site. So I'm keeping tabs. I'm basically buying most of the products. They're almost all from Home Depot in terms of materials, appliances. So I'm going to give you a rough estimate of where we actually are here. Soft costs, Design is basically covered by me here, doing essentially pro bono work, but there are definitely engineering and permit fee costs and inspection costs if you miss inspections, et cetera. So I'm gonna call that roughly 15K. The Aduo itself, I'm paying the contractor 35K per Aduo for this first installation. Again, that's mostly just the bathroom kitchen pieces. You can see a lot of those are really just cheap, costs of these appliances from Home Depot that get cheaper with wholesale. But roughly the time it takes to try this for the first time leads to, I think, a fairly moderately high labor costs that could get shrunk in with economies of scale, and definitely needing some profit for the folks, especially local contractors who would be working with us. So I'm gonna call that about 35K a pop. The site work has been much more expensive than I expected, but I think we made this challenging for ourselves, especially because the homeowner insisted on a raised floor design, although I would tend to prefer putting this garage conversion ADU directly on the concrete slab. So you can see some of the rough costs associated here with framing, et cetera. And that puts us at combined, not so far at my original target of under 100K for an Aduo, but more like 150K. But when I look at this cost, there is a lot of this that is baked in because of mistakes, honestly, we've made in the first time and figuring things out. But I think a big way to think about the direction back to 100K is to really try to dissuade wherever possible raised floor design. Not only is that just additional framing cost, but there are just so many other conflicts you have to deal with, especially with raising water heaters and dealing with wherever the existing gas, water, electrical connections are. I think that just adds a lot of pain. Efficiency gains, I think, are possible once this design is open source and a contractor could just be kind of making this as they go and having a lot in stock to share. And then I hope that with some of the streamlining discussions we talked about, fees getting waived and pre-approval in theory could happen with pieces of the Aduo as well. Then I think like that's my pathway as this kind of goes through version 2, 3, 4 to this actually being less than $100,000 all costs considered for homeowners. And I'll let you be the judge of whether we're anywhere close to that when you look at the documentation. Some of the challenges, I just think adding a little bit on what you've heard in the pot so far. We have one Aduo that we started in East Palo Alto, actually ended up being one of the Cowhome projects that Ileana mentioned that didn't quite make it to the end and got stuck. But one of the things that was just a kind of a head scratcher there was the local sanitary district's insistence on a full replacement of the lateral. I mean, they basically have veto power on your project and can state whatever they want you to replace, which in theory could be done by them, but is something we basically had to put in the money to fix the lateral from the main house and Aduo to the street. So just thinking through the complexities and costs associated with that kind of work, definitely a barrier on the East Palo Alto side. Something I was a little bit surprised on in North Fair Oaks is when we came in to upgrade the panel from 100 amp to 200 amp, suddenly PG&E steps in, and I had totally just not expected that process and said, okay, hold on, we might need 6 months to upgrade the entire neighborhood's transformer, because you might just be kind of, there's not enough power to go to this new ADU, which I think legitimately happens when you're in these types of communities and there's a lot of unpermitted work. So I think there's a legitimate argument that PG&E doesn't actually know how much load there is until they're looking at individual projects. But then the one project that's trying to do the work legitimately becomes bottlenecked and waiting for that work. For whatever reason, I kind of like had to say yes to that. And then a month later said, oh, never mind, we don't have to engineer, go ahead. But I can imagine that just completely derailing the project, especially once you've potentially already started construction and then everything gets resequenced because of the challenge of having to time yourself around PG&E. So I think there's some maybe infrastructural questions to ask there. Offsite inspection, I didn't even try to deal with knowing Nick's experience. So I'm not even communicating to the inspector that there's any of this offsite work happening. When they come for rough framing about 2 weeks from now, they're just suddenly going to see the Aduo and it's still going to have walls open. Not even going to try to get them to start to ask questions about what happened in the factory. But I think that would be a nice place to get to in the future, where you literally have a factory in East Palo Alto and the inspector would be willing to go there and sign off on some of the things that are in this box so that you can close up walls and just make that transition much easier. Otherwise, there's just a sequencing problem with drywall, rough framing, et cetera. Folks in the building trades would I think understand that. And then the last thing that kind of became really clear to me, the homeowner in North Fair Oaks is really doing the ADU for her mom. So when the initial problem is mainly overcrowding, then you're using the ADU to just deal with a basic comfort and health issue. then you lose the potential benefit of the revenue income, the rental income, which makes the initial funding harder. And I think it's a little bit underestimated how often this is the use case for ADUs. So that's just adding to the challenge of getting to green light with funding. Now, this family could do that with the savings they've led up to, but then the example in East Palo Alto basically ended because even with the benefit of Cow Home and even additional subsidy I was going to add through my grant, they were essentially going to have to put no down payment on this. And then there was just the risk of the debt, even though the kind of low interest rate debt that they would accrue, because they weren't going to get rental income, it was for their mom as well. So I think that's just like the hardest kind of problem to solve. And we need to recognize how much that happens in these communities. So that I think gets us to maybe a point where we were curious who would be in the room here. This looks like a fairly small room. I think we've got 15 minutes or so till the end. So I'd be curious if folks want to kind of to jump in with either echo thoughts on some of these challenges we've experienced, but especially if you have some shared experience working in communities like East Palo Alto or throughout San Mateo County. Have we missed anything important or gotten anything wrong from your perspective that are just problem side, things that are making the real world jurisdiction work harder than the kind of utopia we all imagined after state law? And then we will hopefully move to ideas for solutions as well, but we would love to hear from a couple folks. Yeah.
I have a question in the chat.
Sure.
It says, for Derek, aren't the manufactured units UL listed? Why is the building inspection relevant?
So for a duo, no, because it's just a demonstration project. So we're just doing normal stick built in a factory setting. And I wouldn't want to add any proprietary work to that whatsoever, because once those designs are open source, I want just any contractor to be able to provide that service as a product that becomes more recognizable in the community and is like an easier way to get to conceiving of a garage conversion. So mine is on the most organic grassroots version. I think then we've introduced the spectrum in this panel to, there's obviously lots of companies doing the factory built and they're doing the investment necessary to get to HUD or HCD certification, and maybe special UL listed kinds of components can be incorporated. But I'm trying to basically open up a whole new door to a different type of product. I had a question here.
Yeah, my name is Rafael Reyes. I'm with Peninsula Clean Energy. Really interesting what you're doing. A couple of questions. So the panel upgrade. Actually, first of all, this is all the appliances are electric. I assume you're not putting any gas. And on the appliance upgrade, there's quite a bit of work happening on building electrification, where we're heavily involved, obviously, for decarbonization purposes around avoiding panel upgrades. And there may be an opportunity to explore, the methodologies that are coming out of that work, and maybe you're already familiar with them. I'm happy to discuss that more with you. And then another side note I had, and again, this is kind of adjacent to your work, is that obviously with the move towards electric vehicles, access to an outlet is extremely important. And from the standpoint of the economics for low income people, electrified transportation provides usually the second largest household expense. It's a really big opportunity to improve the economics for people. So as opposed to spending $300, $400, or $500 a month on gas, right? You're spending maybe $100 for a vehicle. So I was just noticing in your design that you assume you're going to put a door in front of a standard door in front of the garage door and so forth. Having an outlet, an external facing outlet, even if it's a standard outlet, is incredibly valuable from the standpoint of transportation electrification. And so you may want to look, are thinking about that in terms of the design approach.
Wonderful, thanks. I'll just quickly make some comments. I know you already, so we can talk more about this. This panel, I think, had to be upgraded because it was only 100 amps to start with. I think the sweet zone is 125 if you can kind of get away with that being both for the main house and the ADU.
Actually, we're seeing that 100 amps for full electrification of a home in most cases is enough. Now you're expanding, right? So, but
I mean, in the ADU plus case.
Even there, I think there probably are ways to do it, right? With circuit consolidation, there's usually more headroom available than people are aware of. And things like circuit switching under certain circumstances and things like that are stuff that's emerging out of all of this design work.
Awesome. Yeah, so we should definitely talk about that. Actually, PCD is helping out this family with the heat pump water heater.
Oh, great.
So you're already involved in the program. And I love the EV outlet idea. This specific garage, there isn't even a driveway, so there basically won't become a parking space, but definitely if there were a driveway that is still long enough, totally agree. Yeah. Any challenges you want to add to the plate?
Well, I like with electrification, anytime you start to interact with PG&E, it's a problem, a big problem.
Yeah, okay, so +1 on one with already on the table. Anybody else with want to just introduce themselves or want to weigh in? Challenges?
I have a question, but
Sure,
not an
yeah.
answer.
Sure.
I'm just wondering, like, going back to the first slide where we're like, it's dreamland, like, I'm just gonna, still in that mindset. Is there any way we can leverage ADUs to help renters achieve home ownership at some point or build intergenerational wealth? Because this is focused more on low-income homeowners.
I don't see a direct path in any sense, but certainly there's the indirect side of if this is the only quote unquote naturally occurring affordable housing that a renter can even obtain to then be in the environment that gives them economic mobility to be close to job, et cetera, then that's playing the long game of like, we're just adding more units so that these renters can situate themselves in a place where in the future they could become homeowners. So I'm not sure, maybe I'm not creative enough about anything else at that first step, besides just like, let's get the housing in place at a reasonable cost. But I think there's a lot right at the step of potentially becoming a homeowner, which is related to conversations I'm sure we don't have time to get to today around potential opportunity to purchase policy ideas that are starting to take root in the Bay Area, and just how we can shift a lot of the resources of tech companies and philanthropies to home buying, first-time home buying, and to really hit that demographic.
Does it feel like the East Palo Alto, is it an ordinance that, I forget what it was called? but
It's
the-
a proposed ordinance.
Okay, do you think that, like the deed restriction, do you think that would be helpful for renters to at least have the discretionary income to someday become homeowners?
Yeah, I mean, if you look at, rents at the moment, there's not a lot of savings that people can have, and a lot of people are cost burdened, so any type of savings from deed restriction is very helpful. So that is what we hope for. But it's just getting a policy like that implemented to help, streamline these kinds of processes.
So in answer to so one of my favorite projects that we have, don't get bored by the legal stuff, but is the front house, the whole property is owned by a third party. And then the front house is a family who it's a contract deed, so they are never paid a down payment, but eventually they will own the whole property. And so this is one of my favorite things because I think it builds wealth and not just adds housing. And so over X number of years, they will pay enough so that they own the house. But by building an ADU in the back, they now have rental income that helps pay it off faster. And they also have just a higher property value because now there's two structures instead of one. So that's one of my favorite models that I wish could be more repeatable, but it requires that initial third party, an investor, somebody to own a property and be willing to enter into a contract deed with a renter who will one day own it. Does that make sense? I don't know if
Does
I
that
explained.
happen a lot? Do you have?
I don't know if it happens a lot. I can think of one.
Is that a soup program or
Yeah,
just?
it's not a program. It's, I wish it was a program.
I think we should make that a program.
I mean, it requires someone to hold a piece of property and be willing to do this rather than sell it for as much money as they can on the open market.
I think that fits into the like CLT umbrella, or it's very.
It's
CLT
related,
adjacent.
yeah. It requires, all of the work that we do requires at some point somebody to give away some money. And for some people, that's asking a lot.
I want to make sure I get to setting up the last discussion here, although that might just be that we jump into conversations after this. But Ileana had alluded to the existence of this long history of work So we actually had to skip a lot of that history just to show new stuff and tell new stories. But if you were in HLD, like, I don't know, 5 years ago now, we presented the work of the second unit task force in East Palo Alto and had developed this entire report with 10 big strategy areas. We mapped out the whole housing system as we saw it in East Palo Alto, many different community members involved, and we got to this list of strategies with very specific actions. And I have not let that collect dust on the shelf because I thought there was too much investment in that. So I always go back to this and just see how many of these have we actually made any progress at all on, or that we can just put more emphasis on. You can just roughly see how diverse, but I'm going to go ahead and you can find this online, but jump to a few that I think we've just heard about and that could be explored some more. So my wish list personally for 2023 is, I think some folks know about this GLADR program that HARD helped lead. I don't think any city has really officially pre-approved these, and like, why not? I think there's just so much work that can be done to make that investment a lot of us sat on the steering committee for, et cetera, actually pan out and actually be built by homeowners. So I'd just love to see us not lose sight of those previous investments. When it comes to reducing the cost, I just noticed over on the East Coast an idea like tax break on the county assessment side. And so with all the effort that can be happening locally on fee waivers, I say, why not have a few other people get involved in thinking there? And it seemed to me like if the county wanted to have more leadership on this, I haven't heard any conversation about anything on the assessment side that could be done, and just be curious what that means policy wise, because then we're talking about different actors that can all help lower the costs for ADUs. Gap funding obviously is a problem. Basically, Ileana's summary was, we built a gap funding program. Now we need a gap funding program for the gap funding program to help further ADUs. But I wonder if this is really where tech companies should step in. Because when there are just so many projects in that orange, yellow, et cetera, that maybe just need 20K more, 30K more, then what excuse is there at that point to not just jump in and you get all the status of having actually made the turnkey happen. And then you can build off of so much pre-vetting and qualification and work that's been done. So that would just seem to be the no-brainer to build revolving loan programs, et cetera, on that. And then we talked about pre-approval, bringing back my engineer side. I'd love to see ideas for prescriptive foundation designs that a building department would just allow for a certain thickness of slab or a very specific kind of pier system, regardless of what's on top, as long as it's a one-story ADU. And that would simplify some of our work a lot, I think. And it sounds like preliminarily East Palo Alto would be totally down to have these kinds of conversations. So those are the kinds of things that make me hopeful. We are basically at the end, right, Kiana? So I'm curious if anyone else wants to jump in and has other kind of work they're doing or just hopeful thoughts to end on here. Yeah.
So I was hearing about the amnesty program that you were talking about. Has anything been done to develop one?
Yeah, so we will be discussing this hopefully before the end of the year. I'm surprised it's been delayed so long, since there were, the ADU second unit working group was going on for a while. So I'm hopeful that in the new year things will be different and more conversations will be had.
I think the county can help with, at least I haven't seen it, maybe I missed it, but better documentation of what exactly happened with the initial pilot that the county did. If folks remember that from about 5 years ago as well. But I know in general, some of the resources have kind of gone away for the county to take a role there, but just the clear documentation of what that process was like and what cities should consider, I would find helpful if that hasn't already been made. Anyone else? Hopefully this has been helpful as just showing a little bit of how the sausage is getting or made or not in a local city.
We're still very hopeful. As you can tell, we haven't let go.
Yeah, I actually had a question about the average rents for people who build these ADUs. Is it generally affordable? It's more affordable, right? But is it actually affordable for someone who is a low income home seeker? Would they be able to move into one? In general, what you all have seen so far? So
that is a really tough question. Do you want to?
I mean, that's a really tough question because it really depends. A year ago, interest rates were so low. And so homeowners that were doing refinances to build these units, they could afford to, pretty much, rent the unit at an affordable price and still get a return of investment. But now with interest rates as high as they are, rents go up. So it's so interesting how interest rates drive also rental prices. In terms of the community the members that I've talked to, mostly, all the homeowners, for the majority of them, want to build units to house their own family members. And so when you rent to a family member, we all know, you rent them at a more affordable price, or they help out with other bills. So in firsthand experience, a lot of homeowners are building ADUs to house their immediate family members. And so for that, it's a form of affordable housing. Through the Cal Home program, all the ADUs that will be built with those funds have to be deed restricted at 80% AMI. But still, 80% AMI is still very high in a city where the average median income is 50% of the area income of San Mateo County. So part of my role is to sort of not necessarily motivate people to rent them at affordable rates, but really capture the reasons why they want to build the ADUs, and really try to see if they can rent it out at a more affordable rate. I mean, some of the Cal Home guidelines are at our discretion, we can kind of make them up. And so we could possibly, if we ever do look into revising the guidelines, we could look at actually capping that. If you get funding from the city to build an accessory dwelling unit, to make it even more deeply affordable, maybe reduce the percentage of the AMI.
But it seems like, the other way to think about it is if the homeowner is low income, right, and they're getting market rate, right? That's a big deal from a low income benefit standpoint, right? And then just adding more units on market is obviously avoid continued inflation.
So there's some balance in the benefit to the
Yeah,
homeowner side with the
exactly.
renter side.
Whereas if you're capping the rent that they can get, right?
Right.
This is the exact situation. Just at breakfast, I asked Leon, I said, so there's a place for it now, it's 2-bedroom, and we're aiming to have it be for 80%, capped at 80% of AMI or below, which isn't cheap. Like when you multiply that by about 0.3, it's in the neighborhood of $3,000 a month for a 2-bedroom, which doesn't sound like a low number, but it's way lower than market rate. And I feel like some trouble hitting that sweet spot because I've had lots of interest, like down here, saying somebody said, could you go down to 1,200? And I have a homeowner who's like, no. People not reading the listing careful and saying, I work at Meta and I make 190. And me saying no. So.
I like the model where there could be specific subsidies for low-income people to rent so that a low-income homeowner could get market rate, because otherwise it's a zero-sum
Section
game
8.
between two low-income people.
So I work with HIP Housing and we have the home sharing program. And actually your example of the ADU was Bessie, who I work with. And we have like cash incentives for people who keep rent below a certain amount.
It's like your own Section 8.
Yeah, sort of. But when we try and get potential home providers and say, rent out your ADU through us and we can help facilitate that. But we also want to make it available for low income people and people who basically are trying to transition from a shelter to an actual housing, right? And that's really difficult because a home provider will want to have the rent be higher usually than what would be affordable for that population.
Sounds like a good program.
There's a lot of room for stacking initiatives. We could, like I was saying, we do have some control over the guidelines and what we want to require from homeowners in exchange for these funds. Another thing that we can possibly look at is, forgiving a loan, just as an example. Or I don't think Cal Home specifically, but like if we were to roll out or get any other money to give out loans, maybe if you do rent it out for 50% AMI for 10 years, just in that example, then the loan gets forgiven. So like I think there's ways in order to incentivize homeowners to rent it at more affordable prices. But when you get into the business of telling people what to do with their money or their property, it gets a little sticky and messy.
I think we should continue this conversation off the clock then.
Yes. We have our keynote speaker speaking at 12:15, so about 10 minutes from now. So we have lunch. You need to use the restrooms. You got about 10 minutes until we continue on.
Thanks,
so
everyone.
much, everybody.
Thank you. slide. Let me hear you, like 50 slides to go.
I don't.
We had an interesting church.
That is my way of intro too. I'm
Church owned a house.
Okay.
We
mostly focused
decided-
on like very large complexes.
And everything came together, except the problem was.
Oh,
we didn't charge
wonderful.
rent.
Yeah, all the
It
stuff
was
you're
an
saying
offset
about,
against
like,
salary.
Yeah.
And they said,
Yeah, there's so much like you want to do as like
the
a,
IRS
someone
bills,
that
you have
serves
to
the
use a
public,
certain
and like, it's so hard sometimes to like
percentage of
break
the.
through that
Yeah.
bureaucracy.
And you mentioned.
Well, that came in a number,
Like barriers to implementation of.
two staff members
The city,
who
the city
would
addressing
never
this
pay
regulation.
that amount of
So
rent.
we actually
on their
want
own
to figure out.
because
we
it's
can
too
hire-
high.
Yeah.
So we had to charge